Hello children. So today we are going to study the first chapter of the Hornbill book, that is the Portrait of a Lady by Khusband Singh. But before I actually start teaching the chapter, I want to discuss some of the points with you. That is, today I have decided to teach this chapter not within the classroom through chalk and board, but through a different way of teaching, that is the way of storytelling. So I am going to teach this chapter through my way of storytelling, and there's a reason behind why I have chosen this technique of teaching this chapter through the storytelling. It is that children, that one of the objectives for teaching English, is to give enough confidence to students to speak by their own. And this thing comes only when you get into the habit of telling stories or narrating some of the incidents. And I would not say that for all chapters this technique of teaching the chapter through the way of storytelling would be good and justified, but a story like this, which is given in the first chapter, that is the Portrait of a Lady, I think this way of teaching the chapter through the way of storytelling is it's really going to be just going to do justice for the chapter. So here, and the chapter is like this only where a grandson describes his grandmother. And in a society where we live, here we get to hear a lot of stories from our grandparents, and I'm very sure that even you students must be getting to hear a lot of stories from your grandparents. So I want you to commit one thing to me, that by the time when once you are done with this chapter and you have learned all the things and you have gone through the content of this chapter properly, I want you children to narrate the same story to your own grandmother. That then in English book you got a chapter like this, and you are going to narrate the same story to your grandmother. And whatever the language you would choose, language is never a barrier. Like only students think that narrating and speaking in English is tough. No, even if you want to narrate something, or if you want to speak something in Hindi, even it is equally tough, right? So language is never a barrier. So if you are imaginative, if you can speak in your own way, right? If you can draw the picture, if you can think of different conditions to speak on, so you can speak in any way. So without going much into the things, let us start learning the chapter, that is the Portrait of a Lady. In this chapter, we see, Khusband Singh as a child. He describes his own grandmother, and in the opening pages, in the opening lines of the chapter, we find that Khusband Singh says, that his grandmother is like anybody's grandmother, who is extremely old, and looking at her age, it's very difficult to say that even once she had been young. If we talk about the grandfather, there is given not much of information about grandfather. It is only said that there was a portrait hung in the above the mantelpiece in the drawing room, and in that portrait, grandfather is seen wearing a big turban and loose-fitting clothes, and he had a long beard which had covered a good part of his chest. And looking at his age, one could guess that his grandfather must be of 100 years, and a person like him, he could have only grandchildren. Now again, getting back to her grandmother, Khusband Singh says that her grandmother was short, fat, and bit bent, and she was always seen hobbling around the house in pure white, and one of her hands, rested at her waist, supporting her stoop, and the other hand was busy in telling the rosary, and her lips always moved in constant prayers. And she was never pretty, but she had always been beautiful. She was like a winter landscape in the mountain, and a vast white white a vast white serenity, breathing in peace and contentment. Now, in the as we move on into the further into the story, we get to see that Khusband Singh's parents had left Khusband Singh and her grandmother back in the village. And here we get to see, that when they were together in the village, how did they spend their time and how did they live together. So it was a habit of grandmother, that grandmother every day in the morning, she used to get up child Khusband Singh and used to get him ready for the day. She helped Khusband Singh take a bath, And while doing all this thing, she always used to sing a prayer in a singing way, with the hope that the child Khusbant would learn the things. Now, Khusbant Singh was never particular about learning the things, but still he listened the prayer of grandmother, because he really liked the voice of the grandmother. Now, grandmother in the morning, she would feed Khusbant Singh with the fat stale chapatis with bit of sugar and butter spread on it. And she would also, wash the slate, which was plastered with chalk, yellow chalk. She would also carry a earthen egg pot, a red pen, and all. They were tied together, and then they were given to child Khusbant to be carried. And she also carried some of the stale chapatis for the village dog. Now when they came to the school, that school was attached to a temple, and as long as Khusbant Singh was taught by the village priest the alphabets and the prayer, sitting on the either side of the corridors, the children was made to sit in the either side of the corridor, and the grandmother sat inside the temple reading the scriptures and prayers. When both of them they were done with their things, they would get back home together. And from the door of the temple, the dog would also come back with them. And on their way back, grandmother would feed the dog with the chapatis, and the dog would fight and growl. And doing all these things, they would come till the house of the grandmother. So this was the time, they had together, and this was the certain activities they used to do when they were in the village. Now Khusbant Singh's father, they sent for Khusbant Singh and a grandmother, and coming to the town was like a turning point in their relationship, in their friendship. Why it said the turning point? Because now the Khusbant Singh went to school in a bus, and he was admitted in a English medium school. And with that kind of education, grandmother could only could help. She was not that educated that she would help the Khusbant Singh child in his studies, because it was all English medium school. And so now grandmother did not have much of the things to do, so most of the time, she remained inside, and offering prayers and telling the rosary beads. And there was just half an hour of the time in the afternoon, when which she really enjoyed the most, and it was, feeding the sparrows. Because in the courtyard of the house, hundreds of the sparrows would come, and grandmother would make, crumbs of the chapatis, and they would and she would chew the chapatis at the sparrows, and the sparrows would eat. So this was the only one time, for some half an hour of the time, which grandmother really enjoyed. Now, at times, when grandmother would ask Khusbant Singh that what he was taught, so the Khusbant Singh would say that, he was taught some of the Western learnings, and some of the science and gravity principle of Archimedes, and the earth being round. And when she was asked that if he was taught something about religion and the prayer, he would say that he was not taught any such thing. So hearing all this thing, she really got disappointed, and thinking about that how her grandson would grow up to be where he was not taught anything about religious scriptures and about the prayers. Now one fine day, Khusbant Singh came from school, and told grandmother that he was being taught music and dancing. And listening this, grandmother got greatly disturbed. Why? Because she thought that singing and dancing was the monopoly of the harlots and the beggars, and it was not meant for the gentlefolk. Now Khusbant Singh, had joined the university, and when he had joined the university, he was given a separate room to study. And now the common link of the friendship that was between the grandmother and the Khusbant Singh got snapped. And now most of the time, Khusbant Singh's grandmother preferred staying with her spinning wheel. She spun the thread, and almost most of the time she remained busy in prayer, and telling the rosary beads. And then again, it was her favorite time, when she fed the sparrows. So thousands of the sparrows would come. Some of the sparrows would sit on her head, legs, and even on shoulder, but she would never shoot them again. She would never shoot the sparrows away. And now, having done all these things, when he was done with his university education, he decided to go abroad for the higher studies. And at this, every person at home got emotional because the age at what her grandmother was, it was no one knew that how long she was going to live further. But her grandmother was not very sentimental. And when other people came to railway station to see off Khuswant Singh, she also insisted that she would also go. And nobody could really convince her that she should not go. So she came to that railway station to see off Khuswant Singh. And Khuswant Singh was not very sure that when he would come after 5 years, she would get to see her grandmother. But that grandmother was not at all sentimental, and all the time she was still offering prayer. And when Khuswant Singh was, before he boarded the train, Khuswant Singh's grandmother kissed him on his forehead. And Khuswant Singh really the cherished that moment and that moist imprint on his forehead, thinking that it was going to be the last physical contact between him and his grandmother. But nothing such had happened. After 5 years, when he came back, his grandmother was there back at the station to receive him along with the other people. Now, on that day when Khuswant Singh came home, so there was some change came over the habit of daily routine of grandmother. She stopped prayer and prayer for some time, and she collected some of the women of the neighborhood, and she got a drum and she started singing and dancing like she was doing the welcome for the homecoming of the warriors. The whole night she did all that. And the next day she was taken ill. So doctor was called, and the doctor, like after her all diagnosis, the doctor would say that it was a mild fever and there was nothing much to worry, and the fever would go. But then grandmother had a different idea. She thought it differently. She thought that she was going to die and she could see her death. And she said that she was going to die. And she also announced that she had already wasted some of the hours in not prayer. So she was not going to spend or waste any of her time in talking to people. And while lying on the bed, she kept prayer. She kept busy in her prayer, and she remained busy in her prayer and telling the beds. And after some time, even her lips stopped moving, and the rosary fell from hand, and the people understood that she was no more. She was dead. Now the other people, they lifted grandmother from the bed and laid her down on the courtyard, and they were getting ready for the funeral, and covered the dead body with the dead body of the grandmother with a red shroud. And they left for the preparations for other preparations to take for the funeral. Now in the meantime, the courtyard where she was laid down, where she was put, so thousands of the sparrows came and all got scattered here all around. Now finally the other people came and took the body to be cremated. It was almost evening. So by that time, that courtyard, the sunlight, the red light of the setting sun had almost covered, and there was a different kind of illumination into that area and house of grandmother. So other people finally, they lifted grandmother to be cremated. And when Khuswant Singh's mother saw that thousand of the sparrows were there, she went home and brought chapatis and made pieces and threw at the sparrows with the hope that since grandmother was not there, so the sparrows would fit at the crumbs of the chapatis. But none of the sparrows would even touch even a single bits of chapatis. And when the grandmother's body was lifted along with and the sparrows also flew away in a way as if the sparrows has given their final tribute to the grandmother. So children, so this was the small story, right? This was just a storytelling. So I have tried the story teaching you story in the manner of a storytelling. Now having just listen to this video, and then once you go through the textbook of the chapter, and you would not find any difficulty in understand. And even if you find any difficulty, I would come out with some other lectures based on the same video that would make even your understanding and your hold for the chapter stronger. So is that clear, children? So now after having heard this video of mine, what you need to go to the textbook and after that we would discuss the question answers. So, and one thing you don't forget, don't forget to narrate the same story to your own grandmothers. You could choose any medium you like. Either you could narrate, prefer to, even you could prefer to narrate the story in Hindi, or even in your own language, Haryanvi, or in English. Is that clear? Thank you and God bless you.